we're going to explore the energy vampires in your life. And we'll actually ask you to think about who they are, even to write them down. But we're going to ask you not to place any blame.
Because that would be feeding.
Well, you're right. It is. That is a form of feeding. The moment, well, and then you get into the whole cycle of victim energy when you start blaming them. Really what we're trying to do is get you to be aware of this whole thing called energy feeding or energy vampires, but without blame. Without blame. And we're also going to take a look at perhaps how you are an energy vampire. That's right, because if somebody's feeding off of you, sooner or later you're going to start feeding off of others. It's kind of the human's way to get energy. When we take a look at some of the ways that you're an energy vampire, we're going to ask you not to get angry or judgmental with yourself. What we're going to ask you to do is quite the opposite, to really start to love yourself. A couple of important premises, a couple of considerations. First of all, everything is energy other than us. We're beings of consciousness or awareness. But everything else around us is energy. Right now, where you are sitting thinking whatever you're thinking, that's putting out energy patterns and energy waves. There's energy in the air around you. There's energy from mass consciousness. There's energy everywhere. There is plenty of energy to go around. Creation is made up of nearly an infinite amount of energy. Another important premise, everything you need is already within you. All the answers, all of the energy, all of the solutions, all of the understandings, your connection with spirit, with all that is, it's already within you. Next important point, no one can take anything away from you unless you allow it. So if people are energy vampires in your life, if they're feeding off of you, if they're not just taking your energy, but they're taking your money, they're taking your sense of well-being, at some level within you, you're allowing it. You can make a conscious choice to stop the energy feeding at any point, whether it's people feeding on you or you feeding on them. It's as simple as that. You can make a conscious choice to stop. But if you do, be careful, because your life's going to change.
Just even your simple awareness will you'll see a change in the feeding.
So, what is an energy vampire? Like we said before, it's kind of a dramatic term, but an energy vampire is someone who feeds on you. They have their tentacles into you. They have their energy hooks and claws into you. They're stealing your energy. People have to have energy to sustain their consciousness here on Earth, and oftentimes they go to others to steal that energy. They can show up as in a variety of different ways. They can show up as the people that you consider nearest and dearest to you in your life, people that you work with, and entities that aren't even in physical form. So how do you know if somebody's feeding off of you? How do you know if you have energy vampires in your life? Well, one of the very first symptoms is that you're feeling tired and drained after being around them.
There does seem to be an awful lot of people even wondering about things like chronic fatigue actually perhaps being generated from the feeding. Mm-hmm. And being in relationships where they just know that they're always tired.
Always tired, yeah. That's probably one of the biggest signs. You just feel drained. You barely have enough. And it's actually an important consideration here. Because you're drained, there may be a tendency for you then to do some energy feeding, whether you're doing it consciously or not. Another one is feeling an overwhelming sense of obligation or responsibility, like you have to take care of them. Well, a lot of times they put that on you. That's energy feeding. Because again, this feeding takes place at all different levels: psychic, physical, mental, emotional, and then you just find yourself in a big, kind of a big fog.
You know, Jeff, that's a really strong thing to keep in mind, that a lot of this feeding happens because we allow it. They're not necessarily even, it doesn't have to be deliberate. It occurs and we allow it.
Absolutely. Now I'd like you to stop for a moment and take a look at who you might be feeding off of. Are there people who you're going to and dumping your problems? Are there people without coming up with solutions? Are there people who you might manipulate, maybe not even consciously, but just at some level manipulating? Who are the people that you might be playing games with in your life? You know, it's kind of a very simple premise. If you're a victim, no matter to what degree, but if you're a victim of people feeding on you, taking your energy, if you've ever been a victim of physical abuse, violence, if you've ever been a victim of sexual abuse, you're probably also feeding off others. You're probably also an abuser. Because if people are taking from you, sooner or later, you're going to feel the need to take from others. And again, not deliberately, not in any mean, negative way, but just for survival. So how do you prevent this energy feeding from taking place? How do you stop others from feeding on you or you feeding on them? You make a conscious choice. Make a conscious choice to stop. No more feeding. And then what's going to happen is start being aware of when people are taking your energy and start being aware of when you're taking others. And it will start to become very, very obvious. Little things like you're suddenly watching the news one night and you'll suddenly say, you know, I'm being fed on by the news. It does that. It really does, because there's a lot of drama in the news. And even though it's not a person, it's a kind of a mass consciousness that's literally feeding on you. Just disconnect. Bring back those tentacles, release whatever they have into you. You know, we're all sovereign beings. We've just kind of forgotten about it. We're all absolutely sovereign. We don't need to base our relationships on feeding. We don't need to base relationships on being victims and abusers. Everything that you have is already there. And you know, it will change the way you relate to other people. It will change the way you relate to the world. The world's no longer going to be taking away from you. You don't need to take anything from the world. Can you imagine in this world, if people started to recognize their own sovereignty, their own sense of self-love and self-worth, and this feeding cycle stopped? Oh, it'd be amazing.